Hey, little video on reverb. Obviously, there are lots of different types of reverb, and their applications are varied and wide. You need different types of reverb for different instruments and different jobs. But this video is more about the mechanics and the terms and making sure you understand what the common dials. Every reverb will have a kind of a different set of dials. If I leave that one up there and bring up something else, something a bit more classic, a bit more sort of emulating, some of the similar sort of names here, but presented in quite a different way. Or if you were to use, say, a convolution reverb, you'd get, this one's got so many different types of controls and flexibility that it will be very difficult to learn them all, but you need to know the key ones for you. So we shall do that using the drum mix I did for a drum video, and I brought in a little bit of vocal as well to help give us two different signal sources. So, where am I? Reverb, in a computer reverb, the first thing you need to choose is the reverb type. Obviously this isn't something we had before digital reverbs. We had springs and plates creating artificial reverb. We had chambers creating real reverbs, and that we could record and put in. But since the advent of digital, they're emulating springs, plates, and acoustic spaces like rooms, chambers, halls, cathedrals, stadiums, anything you can imagine. And this is nearly always the first thing you're looking for in any reverb plugin. And it fundamentally changes the tone of the reverb you've chosen. So this reverb, for instance, has got two halls, a room, a chamber, which I don't know what the difference is. It could be a bit smaller, church even bigger. Two different types of plate reverb, reverse is in effect, and we're not worried about that stuff down there. On a convolution reverb, bring that one back, shall I? Excuse me. We have all sorts, springs, like springs we can choose from. It gives us a little picture, I love that. Proper big spring. Tiny spaces, ooh. Inside drums, so crazy stuff. But what all this does is set our overall tone, and then the controls within these reverbs are the same. So this is the first thing you need to know is type, or algorithm it will sometimes be called. What algorithm are they using? So this is a hall reverb. Let's play this vocal through it, shall I? It's got it soloed already.
I don't know how, you don't know now. We don't revolve round, MC goes viral. I don't know now if you're too proud to let it all out, to let us all down.
Very nice. And without changing anything, let's just flick that, see what it sounds like if it was a plate.
I don't know how, you don't know now. We don't revolve round, MC goes viral. I don't know now if you're too proud to let it all out, to let us all down.
So reverb time isn't changing between the two, which you would expect on other plugins, but not on this one. Fine. So obviously reverb is there to give us a sense of space that we've got full control over. We could, of course, recorded the vocal at a distance in a nice sounding space, but we recorded it dry, so we have full control at the mix stage on how these things fit in, and also it allows you then to record in different places with different tones and different mics, and everything kind of then beds together. So, controls. You're going to see what seems like the most obvious control is reverb time. It will sometimes be labeled as RT60. And reverb RT60 stands for reverb time 60, and that is the length of time it takes for the reverb signal to decay 60 decibels. So something that goes in at 120 decibels will take twice as long as the reverb time till it's inaudible. Something that goes in at and not much will go in at 120, that's incredibly loud. Things more likely to go in at 30 and actually you stop hearing it before the reverb time is up. So using this reverb, I'm just going to play with the reverb time. I'm going to listen to, hopefully, it shorten and lengthen.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't revolve. Round MC goes by. I don't know now if you're too proud to let it all out, to let us all down. I don't.
So hopefully that's relatively self-explanatory. It's not the same thing as size, although it is related to our perception of size. Obviously, you will have a longer reverb time in a space that has lots of different angles and reflections and hard surfaces, rather than a physically large space. Obviously, a physically large space then also allows there to be room for more surfaces and angles and things. But it's not exactly the same thing. So what time does, if you think of reverb of having two main elements inside it, it has something called the early reflections, which are the first bounces of the sound off the wall back to your ear. So they'll bounce off one thing and come back, that wall, the floor, the ceilings. But there are a few of them because there are different surfaces, but it's each surface kind of once. And then you have the reverb tail, or the late reflections, which is the reflections that have bounced off multiple walls and therefore have decayed further than the early reflections. They're more, they're more diffuse, to use a technical term which we'll use later. The sound is broken up and they create the long tail that we hear in the reverb. So if I play this again.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't.
That kind of spacey, muffled kind of tail, if I make it really long.
I don't.
That's the reverb tail, whereas the more understandable, maybe if I can take the reverb down and just have early reflections, this reverb allows me to do them separately.
I don't know how you don't know now. We.
Can you hear that as it stops? It goes wee, and you kind of hear it sounds much cleaner, and it's short. How long can I make it?
I don't know. I don't know how you.
Yeah, as I stop that, it just kind of decays, but it still sounds like the same sound. It's just late. It hasn't decayed so much that we can't hear it, that we can't understand it. And bring up the reverb, and we have all this noise that we couldn't really tell that's a human voice, could we? So we have these two elements. And size, and the next controls we're talking about, size, is more to do with the nature of the early reflections than it is to do with the sheer length of time.
I don't know how.
So obviously an early reflection, if you're in a large space, the sound takes longer to hit a wall and come back to your ears, and therefore the early reflections are more spread out. A space that's complicated will still have lots of early reflections, but they'll come back to you quicker in a smaller space. So that's where we get our perception of size. If I make that really small, everything should come back.
I don't know how. I don't know how you don't know now. We don't revolve. Round MC goes by. I don't know now if you're too proud to let it all out, to let us all down.
Obviously, this reverb plugin glitches as I change that. That's not really a problem. You don't change it live.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't.
But I like this little graphic that demonstrates that. When it's really short, you get this kind of robot sound.
I don't know.
You can hear it when I stop it.
I don't know how.
That's because you're in a room that's the size of your head or something, It's not a real sort of thing we're used to hearing. But if you imagine being in like a small alley space, you might hear a noise that's a bit like dang, a bit tony, because you get these close walls next to each other.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't revolve. Round MC goes by.
So that's size, and why size is different to time. And then the other dial that you see a lot I want to talk about is diffusion. Now, diffusion affects the way the reverb tail, the late reflections, how much they're bouncing around and how complicated those reflections are and how varied they are. Try and take the early reflections right out and just listen to the reverb.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't revolt. Round MC goes vibe.
So that's low diffusion, which is kind of like an uncomplicated space.
I don't know how you...
And then we'll dial that all the way up the other way and see if we hear a difference.
I don't know how you...
Little bit. There's not a lot in it, is there?
I don't...
You might maybe hear it on a different algorithm more.
I don't know how you don't know now. I don't know how you don't know.
Yeah, you can just about hear they're different. There's not a lot in it. But from a technical point of view, what you're listening to is a room that's more complicated, full of objects, full of reflective objects, and therefore the bouncing around of the sound waves is more diffuse and less clear. The algorithm will change the parameters and the nature of these size and diffusion, by the way, and sort of just change the way they sound. So it does depend on the main type and algorithm you've chosen.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't.
You see that plates have very little, very fast early reflections, and natural spaces have more spaced out early reflections that get bigger as the space gets bigger. So a church would be big, yeah. The first ones are really far away, and then they come back fast. And the room should be smaller, yeah. Right, next control I want to talk about is pre-delay, which is quite a simple one to understand, but a difficult one to get right in terms of setting. So pre-delay is just a gap between the signal coming into the plugin and then the reverb starting. And I find it most useful on vocals in order just to get a bit of clarity. If you want quite a high reverb level, but you still need that clarity of the lyrics.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't revolt. Round MC goes vibe. I don't know now if you're too proud to let it all out, to let us all down.
Obviously, it's just affecting the late
I
tones,
don't know how.
but it's a bit of a gap. Let's make it really obvious.
I don't know how you...
Can you hear it? Just sort of fades in.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't revolt. Round MC goes vibe. I don't know now if you're too proud to let it all out.
It also has an effect on our sense of size. The idea that the reverb doesn't come back to us. It's not the same as size. Clearly here it's different, but it can give us that perception of size. For drums and things more instantaneous, you're going to want short, if not no, reverb time, really, so they happen straight away. Acoustic guitars and things, you can just take some of the muddiness, because reverb can introduce a sense of muddiness into a mix, and you can just take some of that away by allowing the dry signal to be on its own just for, like 100 milliseconds or less before the reverb starts. Then you'll also see on most reverb plugins a dampening control of an ability to... It's like an EQ, it's not an EQ. It's really important that it's not an EQ, which controls what frequencies and how much reflect and how much they reflect. So in real acoustic spaces, we would expect high frequencies, which are weaker, to reflect less. So we'd see a dampening. This isn't a curve. Sometimes you just see them as a dial, high and low dampening. To have less high reflections, because high frequencies are weaker, they just don't make it to the other side of the room in order to bounce back as easily as low frequencies do. But we can change how that sounds.
I don't know how you don't know now. We don't
Now we hear this is quite artificial, but we're hearing a shimmer on the stop.
I don't...
That's because I've boosted that. It's a nice effect. It's not a natural effect. It's not acoustically what you'd find in rooms, but that depends on your mix. A curve, which is a bit more damping, would be more acoustically correct.
I don't know.
Like that. And then here's a Reverb Eq, which is post-dampening. And you won't necessarily find on all EQs, but it's doing a similar sort of job. It's just an EQ built in at the end of the reverb, so you can dampen it and boost it.
I don't know how.
And it creates an effect. So they're the main controls you need to be aware of: pre-delay, time, RT60, size and diffusion. You need to be aware of the idea that early reflections and late reflections are different and they sound different, but a reverb is a combination of both. Just going to bring up another reverb plugin to see if this looks any different than everything else. This is a really basic reverb, I think. See what we got. We've got our pre-delay, room size, reverb time, high frequencies, low frequencies. This could be density, which is a bit like diffusion, ambience, early reflections on a separate dial. So we're seeing things that are familiar, and you should start to be able to understand what you're roughly doing when you start turning these things. I'll bring up this one, got reverb time. This is a convolution reverb, so we have, usually on these we have less control over things like dampening because they're physical spaces. They have the dampening kind of built into them. We can reduce the size of the room. Of the size of the room. That's totally wrong. Don't listen to me. We can reduce the length of the reverb. And convolution start. Yeah, it's a bit like a pre-delay, I think. So we're seeing the same controls come up over and over again. Little plate is a plate emulator. This reverb's got an infinite mode. It's just amazing.
I don't.
And that'll go on forever. Very few controls in there. We've got a low cut and a mix dial. You'll find that plugins that are emulating a particular reverb, like say Little Play or these ones, will have fewer controls because they are trying to sound like a particular thing that sounded a certain way. So pre-delay, size. Here we have dampeners where we can, it's a nice little visual one, cut the top, create kind of different shapes using the sliders on this one. Reduce the bass. Nice. Here's a sense of, it says pre-echo, so this is talking about the early reflections, just different terms for the same things, being able to look at different reverbs that you may have and identify these core points. So in terms of using reverbs, I would often choose to use, where are we? Longer plates and halls on vocals, drums, short rooms, like less than a second in reverb time, 0.8, 0.6, something like that. Guitars, creatively, you might want to look at spring reverbs, but in terms of just sitting them into a room, I'd usually use like the same tight drum type of room sound for making them sound like they're belonging with the drums. Normally in a mix, I'd only use two reverbs. That is an instrument reverb and a vocal reverb. Unless there's moments where I'm creatively trying to add more. A third, sometimes if I then want to dedicate a snare reverb, like especially if it's a gated reverb that's just for the snare. And really, even though it's a reverb, it's not, I don't treat it like a reverb, I treat it like part of the snare in the mix. And then even that then may send to my more normal instrument reverb. So that covered reverbs and the different controls you should find, and hopefully some understanding of what they did. Right, thank you very much. I will catch you next time.